HTC Touch Diamond. Let's get to it. So the Touch Diamond was a very important phone, not only for HTC and Verizon and the other carriers involved, plus Microsoft who provided the software, but for the entire smartphone industry in general. The iPhone came out in June 2007, and with it brought a kind of change in the way people think about smartphones to touch-friendly interfaces characterized by capacitive screens. Well, Windows mobile devices previously to the iPhone have been all driven by a stylus, small interface elements that make it a little bit difficult to use your finger on the screen. HTC comes into the scene about a year after the iPhone started to hit store shelves and introduced TouchFLO 3D, which really changed the way people used non-iPhone devices like Windows mobile devices and really started to excel innovation in the smartphone area. So before we talk about the software and TouchFLO 3D, let's talk about the hardware of the Touch Diamond. Of course, this is the Verizon version, as you can see here. It had a 2-inch diagonal touchscreen, VGA resolution. If you calculate the pixel density, it's 285 ppi, which in today's age is still pretty good. As some context here, the iPhone 4 has a ppi of 326, and certain other smartphones like the Atrix 4G are around the high 200s. So to be already in the high 200s back in 2008 or 2009 when this particular Verizon unit came out, that was pretty good. And in comparison to the iPhone of the day, which still didn't have the Retina display, this was a big jump. The iPhone of before the iPhone 4, the 3GS, the 3G, and the original iPhone had a PPI pixel density of about 165. So the screen looked a lot better here on the HTC Touch Diamond, but of course it was resistive, and you can always tell a resistive screen if you tilt it just right and you press on the screen, you can see it sink in a little bit. So resistive screens aren't very sensitive. You have to put a little bit of pressure on them. HTC tried their best to optimize the hardware, but you can only push a resistive screen so far. So let's talk about the other buttons here. We have a lot of hardware buttons, which is good because some of them are programmable. Home, back, a D-pad. Center will select. Call start and call end. A lot of people liked having those buttons available. Today the trend on the newest devices is for fewer buttons. In fact, a device like the Incredible S looks like it has no buttons when it's turned off, when in fact it has 4 when you turn it on. Over here on the side, we've got a volume rocker. On the back, we've got this really cool diamond faceting. That's where the Touch Diamond name comes into play. Really picked up on a lot of fingerprints. This phone came out before the days when they started to use that soft touch plastic, which is a really nice way to give a good texture to the back of the phone. Have a 3.2 megapixel camera with no flash. Kind of is outlined by an awesome little triangle. Popping off the back battery cover, we have a 1400 or about 1300 milliamp hour battery here, which is pretty big for that day. A micro SD card slot, and on the bottom you can see HTC's EXT USB. This is their proprietary jack that they went away from shortly after the Touch Diamond in favor of micro USB. And then one day HTC came out and said, we're going to have a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack on every phone from now on. They've made good of that promise, which is great because on these older devices like the Touch Diamond, you would actually need an adapter to use headphones with this weird jack here. Going over to the side, nothing there, a power standby button on the top. Now inside we've got a Qualcomm 528 megahertz processor. In comparison, today we're seeing dual-core 1 gigahertz processors, or at least the Qualcomm Snapdragon single-core 1 gigahertz processor. So this was running at about half the clock, or even a quarter of the clock, of current devices of today. It has 192 megabytes of RAM. HTC's newest phones have 768 megabytes of RAM, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Your desktop computer of, 2002, 2004 might have had 512 megabytes of RAM, and these new HTC phones are actually coming out with more RAM than old desktop computers. That's just how technology evolves. And we've got 256 megabytes of ROM, so not much storage. You have to get a micro SD card with this device if you want to store any media at all. Now we've got a really cool magnetic stylus here, which will actually turn on the screen when you remove it. So if I remove it, it goes on. And because it's magnetic, when you get to the bottom here, it sucks it in, which was a really cool, innovative feature back in 2008 and 2009. Okay, now let's talk about the actual software that is running here. We've got Windows Mobile 6.1. So we're talking no App Store, no built-in kinetic scrolling. I mean, things are a little bit rugged here in the HTC Touch Diamond, so just get ready for that. So I'm going to zoom in, and some of the time I'm going to use a stylus, some of the time I'm going to use my finger. There are still screen elements in this device that just do not work with your finger because they're so small. So of course we have TouchFLO 3D here, which is comprised of these little tabs along the bottom. HTC still uses this interface paradigm in HTC Sense, the interfaces that they have on the Evo and on the Inspire 4G and the Legend, and all of their newer phones. They've brought this forth throughout all of their products, but they've just renamed it to Sense. The idea with Sense is to bring information forward, or in the case of TouchFLO 3D, it brings information out of programs that you would typically have to dig to get to. So for example, instead of going to Contacts, you slide over to Favorites, you flick through your favorites. Instead of going to Text Messages, you have the panel here. Music makes it easy to flip through your different album art without having to dig into the actual music application. You get this really cool 3D view. This was cool stuff for 2008, 2009. And there is no landscape support in TouchFLO 3D, although later they introduced it with the Touch HD. We've got email accounts, we've got the web, and we'll talk about the web browser here and how that is in a few minutes. Here we've got photos and video, and this was one of the coolest parts. So you could flick through this beautiful visual display. This was something you could really use to impress your friends. The iPhone wasn't even doing really cool, fancy graphic stuff like this. It's a little bit choppy, but it was quite nice. And because the HTC Touch Diamond has a resistive touchscreen, meaning you can't do multi-touch, HTC came up with this really innovative way to zoom. You'd make a little circle around the area you wanted to zoom in on, and boom, it zooms. Pretty cool. Very innovative. Because this has a resistive touchscreen, you may find that as I move around here, the phone's not going to respond, because I'm very used to using a capacitive screen, and I don't press very hard. You don't have to these days. On the Touch Diamond, you got to give it a little bit of pressure. So here we have your favorite applications. Of course, you can add your own. We've got weather with the beautiful weather animations, which HTC still uses on their newer devices. We can flick through to see different locations. And finally, we end up on settings. So let's dive into the Start menu, as they called it back in Windows Mobile 6.1. This was still the old style of Start menu, where your recent programs were listed here on the top, and then your other entries were down below. What's interesting is that HTC's newer devices, like the Desire HD, puts recently used programs in the notification shade. It's kind of funny to think that they brought forward a UI element that was present in old Windows Mobile. Just something that's interesting. So here's an example of where you can't really use your finger. You can, but it's very difficult. I'm going to try to land on programs, and there we go. Now, Windows Mobile didn't have kinetic scrolling built in until 6.5. This is 6.1. But HTC figured it out, and this was a really big deal because previous to this device, you had to grab these skinny scroll bars to move around. But now you could use your finger, making it a lot easier to get around the interface. So let's talk about the built-in applications here on the HTC Touch Diamond. We've got games and, hey, Bubble Breaker Solitaire, par for the course on Windows Mobile, and then they introduced Teeter, which was really an awesome application to take advantage of the accelerometer. And this was before Apple had its App Store. We first saw this, and we hadn't really seen many third-party games come to smartphones. So the fact that HTC included this awesome accelerometer-driven game was pretty amazing back in the day. They still use this game, Teeter, in their newer devices. Very popular device, or very popular game. We'll press OK there, and we're back. Office Mobile, of course, lets you view your OneNote mobile files, PowerPoint, and you could edit Word and Excel. All this stuff was standard for Windows Mobile. ActiveSync, of course. People loved it, people hated it. It's ActiveSync. Adobe Reader to look at PDFs. Album, which HTC kind of spruced up a little bit with a TouchFLO 3D-like interface. You could use the D-pad to highlight pictures as you go along. It took pretty good photos for a device of 2008, 2009. Audio Booster, Calendar, I mean, that's sort of built-in stuff. Communications Manager. Now, this device actually came with Opera Mobile to make web browsing better, because the built-in browser, Internet Explorer, was horrible. So here is the built-in browser. I've already loaded the full version of Engadget. It doesn't seem to be loading images here. Let's see if it is checked off, but it's not showing up. And there was no accelerometer support in Internet Explorer here. And this is what it looks like to browse a web page. You've got scroll bars and scroll bars and scroll bars, and that's really it. It's very cumbersome to use. So it's no wonder that HTC and Verizon and everyone else decided to include Opera Mobile, which is a far superior way to view web pages. So here it is. Opera Mobile really helped to extend the life of Windows Mobile, and so did Skyfire, by bringing actually a decent browsing experience to the table. So let's try to go to a website. And by the way, here is the on-screen keyboard. It's very small, yet very usable. HTC did a great job to optimize this. Just to give you an idea, here is my finger. It covers up about 4 letters. Quite a different story from the 4.3-inch displays of today. So I'm going to go to Pocketnow.com here, and let's see what happens. Now this did have accelerometer support, which is great. After a while, this device is not very responsive, as you can see. You know, when the Snapdragon processor came into the scene with some newer Windows mobile phones, and then the Android phones and the Windows Phone 7 devices, different story. That produced a huge leap in the ability of these phones to browse the web. So here we're loading it. It seems to be a little bit slow, but it's getting it done. So here we have desktop class browsing on this older device to sort of bring it up to par with the iPhone. It's not loading all the images for some reason. Of course, we don't have multi-touch, but we can double tap to zoom in. Maybe. There we go. And so browsing was okay. I mean, it worked pretty well here, thanks to Opera Mobile. And then there were many new versions of Opera Mobile that took advantage of server-side rendering and all that. We also have a YouTube application. And there's an example of where I didn't press hard enough to actually make the phone respond. And it seems to be being a little pesky. There we go. Okay, so if we go into the Start menu, we can go into the dedicated YouTube application. Here's the HTC Task Manager, by the way. So the iPhone got a YouTube application, and it was awesome to be able to bring around YouTube's library of millions of videos wherever you go, and high quality was great. So HTC got to work. They made this application. If we go up to settings, we can change the quality. And there it is. It was very finger-friendly. It looked and felt a lot like the iPhone version. It had kinetic scrolling. It looked great. It was really a revolution outside of iPhone to have this YouTube application come to the table for the Touch Diamond, and later for the Touch Pro and all of the subsequent Touch devices. So again, the Touch Diamond was a big innovation. Although it didn't have an app store, it didn't have a capacitive screen, didn't have a super fast processor, in 2008, 2009, it was actually a device that could go head-to-head with the iPhone. HTC really innovated a lot with TouchFLO 3D to bring information out in front of you, and best of all, they made it beautiful. Something that Windows Mobile really lacked at the time, and even other smartphone operating systems like BlackBerry and Symbian really lacked at the time. So they brought forth just a lot of innovation, really holding to their slogan of HTC Innovation, which has since been changed to HTC Quietly Brilliant. So a really cool device, a blast from the past. I hope you enjoyed this throwback video of the HTC Touch Diamond. If you have a device that you want us to do a throwback with, let us know, and we'll try to get one and bring it in and do a throwback video for you. Thanks for watching, and please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. That's it for now.